I walked into my own hotel, exhausted, holding my sleeping daughter, and two women behind my own front desk decided I didn't belong there. They had no idea who they were talking to. They were about to find out. I want to tell you exactly what happened that night, and why it mattered to me so much more than two rude employees ever should have. Because by the time I left that lobby, I had learned something about my own company that I never would have found out from a single quarterly report. There is a particular kind of tired that settles into your shoulders after a long flight with a sleeping child. It is not just the physical exhaustion, though there is plenty of that. It is something quieter, a vigilance that never fully turns off, even when everything around you says it could. My name is Claire Whitfield. I am 40 years old, and I own a small hospitality company. 7 hotels, built from nothing over 11 years, starting right around the time my husband died and I became a single mother to a baby girl I had no idea at the time how I was going to raise alone. That girl is 6 now, Sophie. She was asleep against my shoulder that Thursday evening, her dark braids half undone from the flight, one small hand curled around a stuffed bear with one ear more loved than the other. I had a small bouquet of roses in my other hand, a little crushed from the trip. Tomorrow was the anniversary of my husband's death. We always put flowers in the house that day. It started as something I did to survive the first year. It became a tradition neither of us has ever skipped since. I don't run the daily operations of any single property anymore. I have people for that. But I make a quiet habit of visiting my own hotels unannounced, dressed exactly like this, tired and ordinary, because it's the only honest way I've ever found to learn how a place actually treats people. That night, I learned more than I expected to. I walked up to the front desk. 2 women stood behind it. The taller one, blonde hair pulled into a low bun, navy blazer, a name tag that read Brooke. Beside her, dark hair loose, cream blazer, a name tag that read Tasha. I watched Brooke's eyes move over me in about 2 seconds. The worn jacket, the sleeping child, the slightly bent flowers. I watched her arrive at a conclusion before I had said a single word. I told her I had a reservation under Whitfield, just checking in for the night. She looked at her screen, then back at me, and told me she wasn't seeing anything under that name. I asked her to check again. It might be under a corporate booking. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as mildly inconvenienced. She told me that even if there were some reservation issue, the hotel was fully booked that night because of a corporate event upstairs, and there simply wasn't anything available. I shifted Sophie's weight carefully so I wouldn't wake her. I told her I understood they were busy, but I would really appreciate it if she could look a little more carefully. It had been a long flight, and my daughter needed somewhere to sleep that wasn't an airport chair. I watched something pass between Brooke and Tasha. Nothing spoken, just a small shared decision about how much effort this particular guest deserved. Brooke told me she was sorry, but there really was nothing she could do, and that I might try the hotel 2 blocks over instead. Tasha added, not unkindly in tone but carelessly all the same, that walk-ins sometimes just didn't work out this time of year, and that I should call ahead next time. I stood there for a moment, not angry yet, just quietly taking note of something I had believed for a long time, long before I owned a single building. You learn far more about a person's character by watching how they treat someone who appears to need nothing from them than by watching how they treat someone who clearly holds power. In that moment, I was a tired woman in a worn jacket, holding a sleeping child and a bouquet of flowers. To Brooke and Tasha, that was apparently the entire sum of who I was. I asked if there was a manager I could speak with. Brooke told me the manager was occupied with the event upstairs, and that she really couldn't interrupt him over a room availability question, since, as she'd already said, they were full. I had no idea, standing in that lobby with my daughter asleep on my shoulder, just how much that one tired night was about to change inside my own company. It was right about then that a third woman appeared from a side door near the concierge desk. Older, maybe 50, silver-streaked dark hair pulled back simply, wearing the burgundy vest of the housekeeping staff. Her name tag read Dolores. She had an armful of fresh linens, and she set them down on a luggage cart the moment she noticed the scene. The sleeping child, the flowers, my tired shoulders, the particular stiffness behind that front desk. She came straight to me, not to her colleagues, and asked gently if everything was all right. There was something in her face, an open, unhurried attention that had been entirely missing from the desk in front of me. I told her I had a reservation that wasn't coming up, and that I had been told the hotel was full. She looked at the screen, then at Brooke, and asked if she'd checked the corporate booking tab. She said sometimes reservations made through the executive office don't show up in the standard search. Brooke told her she'd already checked the system and there was nothing there. Dolores asked again, a little more firmly this time, whether she'd checked the secondary tab specifically. I watched Brooke's jaw tighten as she clicked through the screen with visible reluctance. Then her expression changed. "There's a reservation here," she said slowly, "under the executive booking category." Dolores didn't gloat. She just said simply that she thought there might be, and then she turned to actually look at me. Really look, the way I imagined she looked at everyone who walked through those doors. She noticed the roses first, asked if tomorrow was a special day. I told her it was the anniversary of my husband's passing. 3 years the next day. We always put flowers out. It had become our tradition. Sophie picks the vase. Her whole expression softened in a way that had nothing to do with policy. She told me she was sorry, and then she looked at Sophie's sleeping face and said she was beautiful and that she looked exhausted, poor thing. She reached out, asking permission with her eyes before her hands moved, and adjusted one of the rose stems that had bent during the flight. The way a person fixes something small simply because they notice it needs fixing, and they happen to be the kind of person who fixes things without being asked. I have spent 11 years building a company on one belief. Hospitality isn't a department, it's a character trait, and you cannot train it into someone who doesn't already carry the instinct. Standing there, I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt since walking through those revolving doors. Someone had finally seen me. She told me she'd find me a vase before I went up, so I wouldn't have to carry the flowers bent like that all the way to my room. She said it loud enough that Brooke and Tasha both heard every word clearly. I checked in, the suite on the 9th floor, booked weeks earlier through my own office, the kind of routine booking that never should have taken this much effort to find. But before I went upstairs, I asked quietly to speak with the general manager. Not out of anger, because I've always believed patterns are worth understanding before they're corrected. I thanked Dolores and went toward the elevator. I had no idea I would be back down in that break room 2 days later with an offer that would change her entire career. Gregory Sandoval arrived within minutes, composed, professional, visibly anxious the moment he saw the name on the registration screen. He'd worked for my company for 6 years and had met me exactly twice, at regional meetings, dressed very differently than I was dressed that night. He said my name like an apology all by itself. "Mrs. Whitfield, I had no idea you were... I'm terribly sorry for the confusion at the desk. I'll address it immediately." I held up a hand gently and told him I'd like to talk about what had just happened. Not as an executive correcting his staff, just as a guest who'd been treated unkindly tonight, for no reason other than how I happened to look when I walked in. I told him plainly what had occurred. The dismissiveness, the unwillingness to check twice, the suggestion to simply go elsewhere instead of doing the small extra work of looking properly. And then I told him about Dolores, and the vase, and the kindness that had cost her nothing, but had meant almost everything to me in that tired moment. I told him I wasn't asking him to fire anyone out of anger. I was asking him to think about what kind of hotel we were actually running, if the woman restocking linens understood hospitality better than the people standing at the front desk. I went up to my room that night and slept harder than I had in weeks. I had no idea the following week's review would reveal something far bigger than one bad evening. Gregory ran a proper review, the kind any serious complaint deserves. What came back confirmed something I had already quietly suspected the moment Dolores had to ask Brooke twice to check that tab. This wasn't an isolated lapse. There were prior guest complaints about both Brooke and Tasha, filed over the past year, sitting quietly in a system, never properly addressed. The kind of small unkindness that gets absorbed and forgotten when no one with enough standing happens to notice it. I sat with that for a long time, because the failure wasn't only theirs. If complaints like that can sit untouched for a year, the system itself had failed just as much as the two women standing at that desk had failed me. I made my decision the way I make most decisions in this company, calmly and based on the full pattern, not one bad night taken in isolation. I asked Gregory to let Brooke and Tasha go. Not in anger, and not that same week, after the review confirmed what needed confirming. I didn't take any satisfaction in it. I've always believed people generally rise to the standard they're shown, and somewhere along the way, no one had ever shown these two that this mattered. I chose not to meet with them myself. Some confrontations need to happen, and some don't need me standing in the room for them to mean something. Gregory handled the conversations directly, the way the role required him to. What stayed with me far more, in the weeks that followed, wasn't the termination at all. It was Dolores. I found her 2 days later in the small break room behind housekeeping, eating a sandwich on her short lunch window. I knocked on the open door and asked if she had a minute. She stood up immediately, smoothing her vest, clearly startled to see me. Mrs. Whitfield, I didn't realize. I told her to sit, that I just wanted to thank her properly for the other night. She sat back down, looking faintly embarrassed, the way kind people often do when their kindness gets noticed out loud. She told me it was nothing. She just didn't like seeing people treated that way, especially not a mother traveling alone with a little one. She told me she'd raised 3 kids by herself after her husband passed, and she knew exactly what that kind of tired looked like. I hadn't known that about her. She said simply that not many people asked, without any bitterness in it. Just a fact about how these things tend to go. I told her I was restructuring our regional training program, the one that teaches new hires what hospitality actually means, beyond the script on a screen. I told her I thought she'd be very good at helping design it. Better, honestly, than most of the people currently doing that job. She blinked at me and said, "She just cleans rooms, Mrs. Whitfield. She's not a trainer." I told her she saw a tired woman and a sleeping child and a bent flower stem, and she fixed all 3 things without being asked, in about 90 seconds, while 2 trained desk staff stood 3 feet away and saw nothing at all. That isn't a small skill. That's the entire skill. I wanted to pay her properly to teach it to other people. She took a few days to think it over, and one long phone call with her oldest daughter, who apparently told her in no uncertain terms that she'd be a fool to turn it down. She accepted. She became, within the year, the regional training coordinator for guest experience across all 7 of my properties, a role that didn't exist before that November evening, built entirely around what she'd already been doing quietly, without title or recognition, for years. She keeps a small framed photo on her office wall now, not of the hotel, not of any award, just a simple glass vase holding a bouquet of slightly crushed red roses, which I had sent her the week after that anniversary passed, along with a card that read, "Thank you for seeing us when it would have been so easy not to." Sophie remembers very little of that night. She was asleep for most of it. Children hold on to warmth and let the details go. But she remembers, in the vague way young children remember important things without quite understanding why. A kind woman with silver-streaked hair who fixed a flower for her mommy and smiled at her gently while she pretended to still be asleep. Years from now, when Sophie is old enough to understand more fully the kind of company I've built and the quiet, unannounced way I move through it, checking on what matters rather than simply trusting the reports on my desk, she may ask me why that particular night stayed with me so clearly out of so many nights of travel. And I'll tell her it's because that was the night I learned, all over again, something I'd always believed but needed reminding of. Kindness rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly, in someone noticing a bent flower stem, or a tired set of shoulders, or a sleeping child who deserves a bed instead of a lobby chair. The people who offer it without title, without expecting anything back, are very often the ones who deserve, more than anyone else in the room, to be truly seen. That's what stays with me longest from that evening. Not the unkindness, which faded quickly enough once it was handled. The quiet decency of someone who simply chose to look a little closer, when looking away would have cost her nothing at all.